This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Liberia goes into 3 days of mourning after church stampede kills 29 people. Aid now arriving in Tonga after Saturday's eruption and tsunami left the island in dire need of support. Blinken warns of swift, severe response if Russia sends troops into the Ukraine. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. And tonight I'm alongside my colleague Uche, who has our business headlines. Uche.
Thank you, Richard. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. We look at how the newly launched Pan-African Payment and Settlement System will transform trade on the continent. And Rwanda transforms an otherwise killer lake into a source of electricity. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to Richard.
Thank you so much, Uche. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. We begin in Liberia, where the Liberian President George Weah has declared 3 days of national mourning after a stampede incident at a crusade left at least 29 people dead. The incident took place on Wednesday night at a football pitch where Christian faithful were holding a two-day crusade in New Crude Town near the capital, Monrovia. According to officials and eyewitnesses, thugs ambushed the attendees, attacking them with crude weapons, including knives and machetes. The stampede occurred as people tried to escape the venue. Among the dead include 11 children and 18 adults. President Weah has called for investigations into the matter. Well, we have on the phone with us tonight Masa Kene, a journalist at OKFM. She's joining us from Monrovia, Liberia. Masa Kene, welcome to Africa Live. We appreciate your time. Horrific tragedy in New Crude Town. Tell us more about what caused the stampede.
Thank you for having me. Yes, police are still investigating the actual cause of the stampede from last night. But information gathered is that the worshippers or crusaders from the More Grace Church were having a crusade in Niku Town last evening, Wednesday, January 19th. And they were attacked, allegedly attacked by criminals with machetes, knives, and other weapons among the worshippers. And some eyewitnesses I talked to this morning confirmed that they wanted money. They came to ask them for money, that all of the offerings that were being collected, they wanted their share, according to some of the eyewitnesses at internet, including one of the securities of the church. She said they came over, okay, we want to have our share. If the pastor cannot get our share today, most of you will not go home. Those were remarks made by those alleged criminals who attacked those people. And then after the crusade, the information is that when they were trying to make their way home, because it was late evening, they were attacked, trying to run back in a sense, because where they had a crusade, the compound is a high school compound, so they were trying to run back into the compound for safety. And then it was unfortunate. Children, women and children, everybody else started falling off, and 29 person eventually died. Hospital authority confirmed that, including women and children.
All right, Masa Kene, let's leave it there for now. Once again, a horrific incident in New Crude Town. President Weah calls for 3 days of mourning after a stampede incident killed 29 in New Crude Town. Masa Kene, thank you so much for that update and report. In other news, flights carrying aid supplies from Australia and New Zealand have arrived in Tonga. A huge volcanic eruption and tsunami on Saturday had left the island in dire need of support. New Zealand officials says 2 ships will arrive in Tonga on Friday, with 3 more cargo flights scheduled to deliver more aid to the country next week. Telephone services have now been restored, though it may take a month or so for full internet connectivity. The government on Wednesday officially declared a 4-week-long state of emergency starting from January the 16th after the volcano erupted. The UN says over 80% of the population has been badly affected by the disaster. China has joined a number of countries sending aid to Tonga. Tonga's ambassador to China says $100,000 worth of supplies have been donated by the Chinese embassy. Earlier, Tao Aika Uta'auta told CGTN that disaster relief materials will also be delivered. Tonga received this first batch of foreign aid on Wednesday after the main airport's runway was cleared of ash, which prevented planes from landing since Saturday. China says it will continue to provide assistance and overcome challenges to ensure supplies are delivered as soon as possible. Well, the eruption cut communication lines between Tonga and the rest of the world, but the country's largest telecoms company told CGTN's Nicole Ng it now has a satellite link for international calls.
Very emotional. I was certainly emotional when the team contacted me because it meant that, we'd had a breakthrough. And the reason why that was so critical was we knew that families hadn't spoken to their loved ones in Tonga for almost 4 days. So some form of communication was better than nothing. And so that's why we were so desperate to get that voice service up for the Tongan people, not only in Tonga, but around the world. The capacity enables you to do 200 simultaneous calls at the same time. Doesn't sound like a lot. And what we were finding is that Tongans, both overseas and talking to their families, were staying on the line for a very long time. Normally you'd speak to mum and dad and you probably speak for 10, 15 minutes and you jump off. They were staying for hours and hours. So that that motivated us to try and double the capacity quickly as we could. And we did that, within 8 hours of it launching last night, we were able to double the capacity, which was fantastic. And we're looking to then improve the capacity even further.
Well, we know now that there have been 2 breaks in this underwater cable that's so critical for communications and for the internet in Tonga. When can we expect that to be fully repaired and up and running again?
It could take up to 4 weeks so we're looking at middle of February at the earliest. It's very hard to say. If it was a clean cut and there was no volcano around, and because it's still bubbling away there and it's still deemed active, then it would be middle of February. So that's the best case.
And U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has met German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock in Berlin on Thursday as part of his visit to Europe amid simmering global tensions over Ukraine. Blinken had also met diplomats from France and Britain as part of a so-called Quad meeting. The concentration of an estimated 100,000 Russian troops near Ukraine has fueled Western fears that Moscow is poised to attack its neighbor. He is heading to Geneva next, where he will meet Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Friday. Trent Murray is following the story for us from the German capital. Trent, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. What are the highlights of Blinken's speech about Ukraine, Trent?
Yeah, Richard, diplomats here in Berlin spending the day desperately trying to diffuse tensions as concerns grow that conflict really could erupt at any moment, with those troop numbers continuing to increase on the Ukrainian border. As you said, latest estimates suggest that over 100,000 troops are now sitting there, and US officials say that they could really at very short notice decide to invade if indeed President Putin makes that decision. So speaking in Berlin today, Secretary Blinken has tried to send a very strong message that NATO, including the US and Europe, is united in trying to push back against this Russian aggression. They're working very hard to try and deter President Putin from making any sort of incursion into Ukraine. And they're also working to try and make sure there's a united message in saying if indeed he does make the call to launch those troops into his neighbour's territory, then there will be very swift and very serious consequences, including economic sanctions.
All right, that brings me to my next question, Trent. How is Moscow likely to react to all of this? First, President Biden's warnings over Ukraine, and now the Secretary of State Blinken's speech?
Yeah, I don't think officials in Moscow will be particularly pleased both with the speech, but also some of the action that we've seen in the past couple of days. We've seen in the past 24 hours Washington giving the green light to several Baltic nations to begin exporting weapons to Ukraine to help the Ukrainian military. It includes Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. They essentially now can export Javelin missiles there, which normally would target tanks in an invasion. Britain making similar moves, sending military aid to Ukraine. So it's against that backdrop, really, that tensions do continue to ratchet up. Going into that meeting tomorrow, I think things will remain tense when Secretary Blinken comes face to face with his Russian counterpart. There's a lot on the table the two do need to discuss. Moscow has made a number of demands around security guarantees, but already NATO is saying some of those demands are simply non-starters. And yet the US side is also saying the fact that two men can still sit down at the same table and have this discussion shows that despite all of the tension, diplomacy is still not dead.
All right, Trent Murray, thank you so much for keeping us up to date and keeping us up to date with that story. Much appreciated. Let's move on to other news now. U.S. President Joe Biden addressed questions from the press in a rare solo news conference as he marked his first year in office. The president said he supported the Fed's normalization of interest rates to curb rising inflation. Top officials, including Fed Chair Jerome Powell, has repeatedly hinted at the possibility of increasing interest rates soon. Biden says he is confident that the Build Back Better bill would get the necessary approvals. The bill addresses a wide range of social and economic issues, including childcare, women employment, and climate change. Well, meanwhile, in Africa, analysts say the Biden administration still has a lot to do in improving U.S. relations with the continent, as CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy reports.
The recent visit by the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Kenya, Nigeria and Senegal was seen as highlighting an important set of priorities to strengthen U.S. Africa foreign policy. But analysts say the crises in the Horn of Africa have exposed Washington's lack of a clear policy for the region.
Look at the conflict in Ethiopia, for instance. I mean, the U.S. has been giving very mixed and confusing messaging in terms of the conflict. In that way, I mean, it becomes very difficult for it to have a grip on what it's that it's actually standing for and how does it move together with the countries of the Horn of Africa to then achieve its own interests.
Analysts say the U.S. needs to prioritize the issue of terrorism in Africa.
For me, the major aspect is look at it in terms of how it conceives terrorism, how it has been approaching it, and there's a problem in that, and it doesn't seem to vacate this approach.
Expectations on how the Biden administration handles the COVID-19 pandemic in Africa have been high. The recent imposition of an Omicron-driven travel ban by the U.S. on 8 countries in southern Africa was seen as unfair by many African leaders. But with just 1 year into his tenure, analysts say it's premature to write off Biden's Africa policy. Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
All right, let's dig into this a little more. We have CGTN's John Terrett live in New York for us. And from Pretoria, we have Professor Chris Asike, a professor of African politics and development at the University of Pretoria, South Africa. But first, let's start with you, John. John, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. How has President Biden's anniversary briefing been received? Let's start from there.
Well, you know, Richard, this is a very, very partisan country. You know, you're either Republican or you're Democrat, and they have some swing voters, but they're either going left or right all the time. And so you have to remember, when you look at coverage of what he did in this speech yesterday and this press conference yesterday, you have to remember what the political background of the television channel that you're watching is. So on Fox, for example, he's been basically ridiculed. And on MSNBC, for example, which largely is a Democratic supporting channel, then they're trying to support him every way that they can. January the 20th is inauguration day for all new American presidents, and so it was 1 year ago when President Biden came to power. And this is only the second of these press conferences in a televised setting that he has done, as far as I remember. And he's probably doing it partly because of the anniversary, but also because his poll numbers are extremely grim at the moment. More Americans in poll after poll disapprove of the job that he's doing compared to those that approve. Now, I have to say that the question and answer forum is not his favorite. He's not a natural orator, Richard. He's not an Obama or he's not a Ronald Reagan. And I watched the entire 1 hour and 50 minutes, 1 hour and 50 minutes, far longer than we were expecting it to go on. So he did very well in terms of, dragging it out and getting all the points raised. But I have to report to you that it was rambling at times, although I also have to report that some pretty tough questions were asked of President Obama, even by journalists representing newspapers and television stations that generally support democratic policies. Richard?
All right, John, Biden not exactly an orator, an important point that you've made there, but tell us what happened in the 1 year regarding trade relations between the U.S. and China.
Or regarding China, well, of course, it has started off in a way that nobody quite predicted. I well remember when President Biden came into office on the 20th of January in 2021. The assumption was that he would be a lot easier on China than he has turned out to actually be. And if you cast your mind back, Richard, you remember that meeting between the two sides to get together after President Trump and talk about trade issues? It basically descended into a slanging match, a shouting match between both sides. And we've had the delisting of Chinese companies, particularly the telecom companies, here in New York at the New York Stock Exchange. We've got the anti-China competition bill working its way through the Congress. It's still stalled there, like a lot of Biden legislation at the moment. That has a direct impact on Africa, by the way, because if that bill passes, the people in Congress think that it will be able to go after China regarding Belt and Road, particularly in Africa. So that anti-China competition bill has a direct link to the continent. And of course, there's the corporation investment ban, which Biden widened. He didn't decrease the number of Chinese corporations that Americans cannot invest in. He increased it. And then we had the Xi-Biden virtual summit back in November, which seemed to go pretty well. Now, I will tell you that China was mentioned only very, very briefly in this 1 hour, 50-minute press conference. A journalist asked him, isn't it time to end tariffs against China? And he said, I've deputized my trade representative, Richard Nta, to look into that. She is looking into that. I believe I caught him saying, I'd like to do more, but it's uncertain regarding China. It's uncertain. So that caps off the year regarding Beijing and Washington relations. From the Washington perspective, from the Biden perspective, things are uncertain.
All right, John Nta, thank you for bringing all of that there to light. We appreciate your insights. Let's bring in now Professor Chris Asike, a professor of African politics and development at the University of Pretoria, South Africa. He joins us live via Zoom. Professor, welcome to the program. Let's begin with the issue of the U.S. and Africa. What's your take on U.S.-Africa relations under President Biden in the last 1 year?
Well, thank you for having me, and good evening to your viewers. Look, historically, we have not had, fundamental changes in foreign policy towards Africa from, U.S. governments. The fundamental approach to Africa has always been the same, treating Africa as junior partners. And I don't think that has changed as such, in terms of wanting what the U.S. seeks to get from the continent. But what has changed fundamentally, if you like, is the conception of Africa as equal partners. And from the beginning, the Biden administration promised mutually respectful relations, and he kicked that off by rescinding travel bans on citizens from, numerous Muslim majority nations on the continent. But this is not based on any kind of a truism. It's coming from a U.S. focus on geostrategic competition with China. So basically, what we have seen is a five-pronged Africa policy, that focuses on health security, that focused on economic recovery, helping Africa to respond to the climate crisis, and then in terms of conflict, promoting peace and security, as well as democracy, even though many of us feel that the United States doesn't have much to teach us about, democracy. But there's been a focus on promoting democracy and human rights and helping to fight corruption. So overall, the approach has been a focus on people and a recognition of Africa's political and cultural, power.
All right, you mentioned Africa being treated as junior partners. That leads me nicely into my next question. The African continent has seen major conflicts in Ethiopia, Sudan, and West Africa. How has the Biden administration engaged with such issues compared to how it has been involved in other regions of the world? From your perspective, how do you see it?
Well, there has been an interest in line with the military approach to the continent. They engaged, extensively with European partners and Gulf countries, including the United Arab Emirates, which had close relationship with the Ethiopian Prime Minister, for example, if you look at the Ethiopian case, and then, with various African leaders, including the African Union's Special Envoy, former President of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo. So there's been efforts, and I know that they did place some sanctions on Ethiopia, which may have helped to try and contribute to some of the respite that we got sometime last year and probably getting now. So look, there's been engagement, there's been an attempt and effort to take African conflict seriously, because the U.S. understands that a safe Africa will also mean a safe United States. But my joy with all of the engagement with Africa is also the focus on human security issues, governance issues, and problematizing poor governance and corruption as a human security challenge that can also lead to state security challenges.
All right, Professor Chris Asike, a professor of African politics and development at the University of Pretoria, South Africa. Thank you so much for your insight and analysis. Well, we have a lot more coming up on Africa Live, so don't go away. Time now for a short break. Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. Africa has entered a new era of health sciences. The establishment of Africa's Access to Advanced Healthcare Coalition brings together several sectors of society to advance the continent's pharmaceutical and medical capabilities. It includes a state-of-the-art vaccine manufacturing campus that will develop the next generation of COVID-19 and cancer vaccines. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
South Africa stamped its name in history as a new vaccine plant was opened in Cape Town.
Just within the walls of this facility here, that would appear to be empty, but which is about to be filled with high-tech machines, manufacturing capability, that we will be able to have advanced skills that will be developed, and through other initiatives across our continent, that our vision for vaccine, diagnostics, as well as drug manufacturing in Africa will soon take form.
The groundbreaking investment by South African-born tech billionaire Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong will enable the development of second-generation COVID-19 vaccines that destroy the virus and prevents it from being transmitted.
We have now developed this SNN T-cell vaccine as a second-generation vaccine, and we want to manufacture this in Africa, for Africa, and export it to the world.
This investment sparks a new era in Africa's pharmaceutical manufacturing landscape. No longer will the continent have to rely on the help of others to take care of its own people.
Africa should no longer go cap in hand to the Western world, begging and begging for vaccines that they just want to drip off from their tables. We will stand on our own.
95% of pharmaceutical products used on the African continent are imported.
This is what so many organizations and the African Union, African CDC governments have been working for. May we never be in a situation again where the world gets vaccinated, and even today, 2 years into the pandemic, only 8% of the African population have been vaccinated.
It's not just about this facility, but it's the level of investment that's happening in science and technology in South Africa. And I think that's very important to have a little bit what China did in the past, to have all the process that from identification to production of biologics, and that's the idea that South Africa is trying to do now.
This facility aims to produce 1 billion doses annually by 2025, bringing hope not only in the fight against COVID-19, but in time for cancer, TB and HIV treatments. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
And now time for our business segment with Uche. Over to you.
Thanks, Richard. And coming up on Africa Live Biz, we look at how the newly launched Pan-African payment and settlement system will transform trade on the continent. And Rwanda transforms an otherwise killer lake into a source of electricity.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Well, let's start off with Ghana. The country's state-owned oil company is progressing with plans to sell liquefied natural gas throughout West Africa. Now, this is after shipments of the fuel begin to flow to an import terminal in the country this year. The Tema LNG Terminal Corporation is expected to start commercial operations at the plant in the second quarter of this year. Now, the Ghana National Petroleum Corporation will buy the LNG from Tema and sell it onward. GNPC also says it is working with partners interested in building infrastructure to sell LNG to domestic users and, of course, those within the sub-region looking to boost their power. The firm also says it plans to create an energy hub for the region. And the UK's Department for International Trade has hosted the second edition of the Africa Investment Conference. The conference marked 2 years from when the UK Africa Investment Summit was hosted in London by Prime Minister Boris Johnson. More than 24 trade and investment deals were announced then. Here's CGTN's Nick Budimba with more.
The conference marks 2 years from the UK Africa Investment Summit hosted in London, where 27 trade and investment deals worth $8.9 billion and further commitments worth $12.1 billion were announced.
You know, the many investors see Africa as risky, and I think the perception of risk is probably much higher than the actual risk itself. So we have all those Fitch and Standard & Poor's and their ratings, but I think we need to step back and ask those who have been doing business, who are taking the long view on the continent, what are their returns and what is the actual risk?
The summit will also showcase emerging opportunities across Africa, including in clean growth solutions, highlighting UK expertise. It will explore inclusive, sustainable and resilient investment opportunities and will highlight UK government support that is available to business. The conference will make the case for strengthened closer collaboration and partnership between the UK and Africa, showcasing emerging opportunities across the continent and UK capability and expertise. The UK Department for International Trade is prioritizing building strong trading relationships in Africa, which have the potential to create, diversify and protect investment opportunities. The UK has so far signed 9 trade agreements with 17 African countries and ensured continued market access for the majority of the remaining African nations through the UK's Generalised Scheme of Preferences. A memorandum of understanding with the African Continental Free Trade Area has also been signed, the first of its kind with the non-African country. Some of the sectors that will be on the agenda include advanced manufacturing, aerospace, automotive, creative industries, energy, financial and professional services, food and drink, life sciences, retail and technology. It follows an increased effort across government to facilitate UK-Africa trade, including the UK Export Finance. The UK's Export Credit Agency has significantly increased support for markets in Africa in the past year from approximately £600 million or $817 million in 2018-2019 to over £2.3 billion or $3.1 billion in 2020-21, supporting a range of infrastructure projects in countries like Cote d'Ivoire to Uganda. The Africa Investment Conference aligns with the UK's aims to promote trade and investment as a driver of economic growth that can trigger positive changes in a country's economy, helping to raise incomes, create jobs, and lift people out of poverty. It is said to bring together over 4,000 registered delegates for a series of panel discussions and matchmaking opportunities, and represents the lasting legacy of the UK-Africa Investment Summit hosted in London by Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Last year's virtual conference was attended by over 2,800 delegates from over 40 African countries and across the UK. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Now, Lake Kivu in Rwanda is not quite the picture of tranquility, it seems. Thousands of years of volcanic activity has now caused a massive accumulation of methane and carbon dioxide to dissolve in it. But Rwanda is now making something out of it. Engineers aboard a floating power station are now working to harness that power into useful electricity and also prevent destructive explosions from the lake, now classified as a killer lake. Here's CGTN's Beryl Oro with more.
Flanked by the rolling quiet green hills, Lake Kivu, one of Africa's great rift lakes, lying between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, has enormous concentrations of potentially explosive gases within it.
So yeah, this is what we call a killer lake. So we have three this kind of lake, killer lake in the world, 2 in the Cameroon that erupted in the 80s, and this lake. The risk with this kind of lake is that we have oversaturation of gas in the water, and that it may trigger what we call a limnic eruption. What is a limnic eruption? It's a huge explosion of gas from deep waters to the surface, which will create waves, tsunami at surface, and so on. And in the 80s in Cameroon lakes, it killed more than 1,000 people. So we don't want that it happens here.
In both Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, many live in fear of the lake's harmful potential, and stories abound of swimmers disappearing into its depths after being asphyxiated or pulled under. The lake, however, poses both peril and promise.
We try to turn these threats into opportunity. So removing this gas, if it's done correctly, may help to reduce the risk of a limnic eruption. And of course, when using this gas, we can also help the country to develop by, for example, producing electricity, then we have 2 chances from one threat.
Kivuwat, which says this is the only project of its kind anywhere in the world, saw an opportunity to tap into these abundant gases for energy generation. The facility pumps water saturated with carbon dioxide and methane from around 350 meters to the surface.
In terms of generation of electricity, on an annual basis, we produce between 210 215 gigawatt hour per year, and this contributes around 30% of energy need for Rwanda.
The excess carbon dioxide is pumped back into the lake at a precise enough depth to ensure the delicate balance is not upset.
When you compare the emissions, the carbon emission, we compare from Kivuwat as compared to a diesel plant, kilowatt is like 3 times less polluting as compared to a conventional diesel-driven power plant, and is 5 to 6 times less polluting in terms of carbon emission to a traditional or conventional peat power plant. So I would say while we are burning this gas here, even if it is a thermal plant, it's still considered as a clean source of energy.
The company says it hopes that removing methane could over time reduce the pressure within the lake and possibly lower the risk of a limnic eruption. How long it will take to deplete these vast gas reserves will depend on the pace of extraction. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
And heading to Tunisia now, the country's economic growth is expected to rebound to 3.5% this year. That's from 2.9% recorded in 2021, according to the latest report published by the World Bank. The North African nation's economy is, however, projected to decelerate to 3.3% in 2023, and that's due to an ongoing political crisis that got worse last year. Here's CGTN's Anan Shaushi with the latest from Tunis.
An acceleration in COVID-19 cases, increased restrictions on mobility, and political uncertainty throttled Tunisia's economic rebound in 2021, and the World Bank is warning that the current health crisis could slow down its recovery this year, which it forecasts will reach 3.5%. Economists say the growth is possible, but not enough, because most economic indicators were negative in 2021.
Achieving 3.5% economic growth is realistic, but it is not enough, and it does not reflect that Tunisia's economy is recovering from the repercussions of the coronavirus crisis. The 2020 growth rate was a historical negative 9%. The country needs at least 9% growth in 2022 to say that the national economy is improving after the pandemic.
The World Bank also estimates that the high level of debt could impact economic activity in Tunisia. Experts have said that the current situation increases the risk of debt being unsustainable if economic indicators do not improve in 2022.
Tunisia's public debt has exceeded 100% of GDP. This will not encourage foreign and local investors to start public-private partnerships because the public sector might not be capable of paying its debt. Investors don't want to lose money. This will slow down economic activity.
The Tunisian finance minister declared that her department has approved new measures to help businesses cope with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, preserve jobs, and sustain business activities.
The 2022 state budget includes several measures to promote investment on all levels. The government will provide a favorable investment and business climate that will contribute to the economic recovery this year.
The World Bank estimates that as vaccinations increase and mobility restrictions ease, growth should accelerate further in Tunisia. However, the outlook is uncertain and depends on the course of the COVID-19 pandemic in the North African state and the world. Tunisia is facing several challenges due to the lack of political and social stability and the constant pressure on economic indicators. Analysts maintain that there is high uncertainty over the economic recovery and the negative impact of the pandemic. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And a new payment system introduced under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, or the AFCFTA, is now set to boost cross-border trade. The Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, or PAPS, will allow traders within the continent to transfer and receive money in their local currencies. Here's CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufaya with more.
More than 1.2 billion people in Africa can now trade with each other under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. The rollout of the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System is aimed at further boosting cross-border transactions. It will make it easier for traders to send and receive money instantly in their local currencies.
For now, we have EcoBank with other banks. They'll be hooked to PAPS. Therefore, my bankers will follow my instructions and transact through PAPS to my recipient in Nigeria. Now, the supplier or the buyer in Nigeria, or whatever, is going to receive it in a denominated local currency. Prior to PAPS, if you want to do a transfer or buy something from somebody outside, even though the value is in local currency, you have to denominate it in a hard currency, dollar, pounds, or euro. This time, Afreximbank is like anchor with the central bank. You don't need to.
It's hoped that PAPS will reduce the cost of making payments across African borders.
The African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat says PAPS will save the continent $5 billion every year. That's the amount of money Africa uses to convert local currencies to other currencies like the US dollar, pounds, and euros when making cross-border payments.
But as the global economy shifts towards digital currencies, some analysts believe Africa needs its own single digital currency to advance the cause of the AfCFTA.
African countries on a landslide need to do more around ensuring there is a strong, productive and competitive economy, all right, which also informs the value of the currency. Now, once we're being able to secure that, it invariably means that an e-version or a digital version of our currency would be a lot more of good value, all right, in terms of positioning for trade activities, unlocking the AfCFTA agreements, all right, and executing trade across and within borders.
While PAPS is in its early stages of rollout, experts say it could be a launchpad in Africa's quest for a single digital currency.
This is a foreshadow of how a single currency is going to look like. But before you have a single currency, you have to have one central bank. So now that all the central banks are hooked to an anchor bank, it means that it's preparing us for a single currency.
For now, though, it is hoped that the Pan-African payment and settlement system will help improve financial inclusion within the continent while driving the cost of intra-trade down. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up later on Global Business Africa, we'll be taking a closer look at Nigeria's plan to resuscitate its ailing energy sector and why consumers are not yet excited about it. Of course, all that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to Richard.
Thank you so much, Uche. We look forward to all of that on Global Biz. But for now, Africa Live continues with much more of the day's stories and sports. Here's what's ahead. In sports, Egyptian fans not content with team's performance so far at the ongoing Africa Cup of Nations in Cameroon.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Sport on Africa Live with me, Richard Nta. Let's talk a bit of football.